Hey, how you doing? Today, with a beer, I thought we'd talk about mini marts or convenience stores. A lot of people call them. Yeah, they're really big now. They didn't used to be quite that big. Well, especially not in the 40s and 50s. There was almost no such thing. But they were pretty popular, once you got to the 60s especially, and then into the 70s. So I guess the first 7-Eleven, which is a big chain, actually started in Texas in 1927. They didn't sell much then, and it used to be called Totem, something like that. And then in 46, they changed the name to 7-Eleven. And of course, that was because they were open from 7 in the morning until 11 p.m. And to them, that was really extended hours. Because stores didn't used to be like today, where they're open all the time. So, I mean, a lot of them are 24 hours now. But back in time, it wasn't like that. Well, I worked at one of these convenience stores when I was in high school. And this was like in the mid to late 70s. And the reason I worked there, well, the biggest reason, obviously, is I needed money. But also, my high school had a program, and I think it was called like co-op, something like that, where you could get credits for high school from working. And I thought, that's a pretty good deal. Because I never was really big on sitting in classes in high school. So if I could get credits plus get off of school to go to the job, that was a win-win situation. So that's what I did. And I knew the manager at the local store. And so she gave me a job, like I said, when I was in high school. And I always told her, now you got to remember, in the mid 70s and stuff, the minimum wage was like maybe $2.50 an hour. So I wasn't making a lot of money, but that was a steady job, and it was one that I could get, especially being in high school still. So I got in pretty good with her, and I told her, give me whatever hours you can, because I need the money. And she goes, well, how about weekends? And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I don't care when it is. Now, there was a catch that I told her was in the summertime, don't schedule me for Saturday and Sunday in the mornings, because I'm going to caddy. I was a caddy at the same time too, and made better money caddying than I did at that little convenience store. Quite a bit better. for caddying. So that went along great. I was doing that. And except for the summer, I would always work on Sunday mornings. And it got to the point where I would open the store. So I would get there a lot of times, as the sun's coming up or just before the sun's coming up. And of course, the store was all locked up and everything. And there, on Sunday, there would always be a pile of newspapers at the front doors to the store, because the newspaper companies would bundle the newspapers up and in like plastic strapping, and they would deliver them to the store before the stores opened. So I would get there and get the newspapers in the store. Well, like I said, it was dark, so I remember, though, the parking lot of the store, it wasn't very lit up at the time, but there was a street light over top of where the phone booth was, sort of toward the road, where like right at the edge of the sidewalk. So that street light would light up enough that I could see in the parking lot, to get the newspapers in. So I would unlock the doors, get inside, turn a couple of the lights on, get the newspapers inside, and lock the door again, because the store's not open yet. I'm the one that's opening up the store. So, cut the binding on the newspapers and stack all them in this, like a wooden rack, where we also sold magazines and maps and stuff like that. So this one wooden shelf rack system was like its own mini newspaper stand, right inside the store. So I would get the newspapers all situated in stacks, because there was probably easily 3 or 4 separate newspapers that people could buy from the different localities around that area. The next thing I would do all the time was get the coffee started. A lot of the people who were customers, especially on Sunday, would stop in there. So I got to know a bunch of the guys from the area. And they would stop in every Sunday morning. So they would get their coffee and then their newspaper. And sometimes these guys would stand around just talking and shooting the shit for like half hour or an hour, because evidently they didn't have a whole lot to do on Sunday mornings. So they would just hang out there, gathered around the counter and the cash register, and we would all just be there talking about local events, what's going on in this little community, So there was other stuff besides just standing around talking that was my job in this little store. Stocking the cooler shelves, with milk and ice cream. Now you have to remember, this was a small store. By today's standards, really small. It might have had 3 little rows of shelves, that were probably only, each row might have been 8 feet, something like that, we didn't sell much, and mostly it was stuff like you would see in your convenience store today, except less of it. So some bread, chips, a few things for the kitchen, maybe some sugar or flour or something like that, but not much. It was mostly milk and eggs and ice cream in the freezer section and then the cooler section. So I would go back there once the other guy got into work, or if nobody was in the store, I would go back there and load up the milk and the ice cream and stuff on the shelves and stuff like that. And I always made sure I had a coat handy for that freezer when you're putting the ice cream in there, because you're actually inside the freezer behind the shelves. And the dairies would deliver the milk and the ice cream in like crates, plastic crates. And we would just use that and load the shelves. The dairy people would deliver it to the freezers and the coolers. One of the other things that was in the freezer was soft pretzels. This area is really big on soft pretzels, so we would have bags of them that were frozen. We keep them in the freezer. And another piece of the job I did was I always had a stack or two of them on the counter by the cash register. And they would sell pretty quick. So then when I saw the stack was getting low, I would just go back there in the freezer and get a bag of them. Say it was like a dozen in a bag. Bring that bag out to get it started thawing. And then I would wrap them in saran wrap, back behind the counter, and set them up on the counter for sale. I would do that a couple times in a shift because they sold fast. Another thing too, we sold lunch meat at the little convenience store there. So somebody could walk in there and buy like, a half a pound of sweet bologna, something like that. And we had a meat slicer, and we had the brands of maybe 6 different kinds of meat, some ham and stuff like that, and maybe 2 or 3 kinds of cheese at the most. Not a whole lot, but if somebody needed some, we sold it by the pound there. And we also sold subs that were already made up. So part of our job too was to make these subs. So you had a head of lettuce, and you run that through the meat slicer, shred it up, cut the lunch meat, and ham and cheese subs were big. We sold a lot of those too. I know, like I'd usually make a dozen or so of those at a time. Slice the ham and all that cheese, wrap them up in saran wrap, because a lot of the guys, especially during the week, would stop in there on their lunch break. And they'd get like one of them ham and cheese subs, a bag of chips, and an iced tea, something like that, because we sold some soda and tea in the cooler section also, where the milk was. And so they'd get a couple of things, from this, for their lunch from the store, bring it up to the counter where the cash register was. And it wasn't like today. There wasn't a scanner. You just scan this stuff. No, it was a sort of larger, old mechanical, clunky cash register. So you would just have the price of the thing marked $1.15, and you hit the keys for that. And those, what now seems old, they look like black metallic numbers would pop up, and it would add them up and stuff like that. And back then, it was cash. So if the guy's bill was $250, okay, 99.9% of the transactions were cash. It was rare if you ever even saw a credit card back then. Now, we didn't sell gas either at that little convenience store. Years and years later, that little store got demolished. And like I said, it wasn't very big. It was only like 3 rows of aisles, for chips and pretzels and stuff. Well, they bought the piece of land next to that also. And what they did was they demolished it and built a store that was 2 or 3 times as big, offset on that property, and put in the gas pumps and stuff out front. It looks totally different than it did back then. But like I said, they leveled it entirely, and then leveled the whole piece of land and recreated the whole store. Like, it's the first time I went by it, because I normally wouldn't go on that road anymore once I was years and years and years later. The first time I went by that after it was done, I just looked and went, wait a minute. That used to be the little store on the corner. Now it's back in there and a lot bigger with gas pumps. But yeah, back then, we didn't have gas back then when I worked there. It was mostly, like I said, on Sundays, people stopping by to get their coffee and a newspaper. Sometimes, if I was working during the week, at lunch, it was the crowds for, a quick lunch, like I said, a sub and some chips or something. And 1 or 2 other things we sold. A lot of it was just a local family there that needed some milk or eggs or a loaf of bread or something. That's about the only stuff that the people were buying back then. Today it's crazy, and I think even today the place might be open 24 hours. It wasn't open 24 hours either back when I was working there. But my favorite days to work was Sundays. Not in the summer, but in the rest of the year. Because there was a lot of bonding going on, with people, like I said, just coming in there and getting their coffee and being a little small community and just standing around talking. You don't see that today. It's not like that in today's world. Get their stuff and leave, and that's that. Speaking of that's the end of that beer. So until the next time, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you later.